The Life of a Jackal, Book 1. A sailor, a husband, a kid from the south side of Chicago. The beginning. Chapter 10. The Iron City and the Horizon. The battleship is the only ship that can truly occupy a piece of the ocean by its mere presence. That's a quote from Common Naval Adage. I reported to Pensacola, Florida, where the USS Wisconsin BB-64 was being brought back to life. She was being recommissioned, undergoing a massive intricate surgery required to turn a mothballed legend into a modern war machine. Pensacola was slow, a boring stretch of months where we waited for the iron to be ready. But then it came the day we finally pulled away from the pier, leaving the Florida coast behind, to head for our home port in Norfolk, Virginia. Wasn't really much to say about Pensacola. Just remember getting there. It was evening time. I was starving. They took me to the galley and got the cook to throw me together a couple of sandwiches. Everybody was pretty much going on liberty or resting. I woke up, not much was going on. I think it was the weekend. So I just walked around the city a little bit. There was really nothing there to be seen. And that's how it was pretty much every day. We didn't stay there long, so there's not much to report about Pensacola, Florida. So on to Norfolk, Virginia. That was the first time I had ever been on a ship. Actually, the first time I'd ever been on any kind of boat in my life. You'd think a kid from the south side of Chicago might feel out of place in the middle of the Atlantic. But I found something out there that I never expected. Serenity. There's a peace on the open ocean that you can't find in the city. The water was so calm, a vast mirror reflecting the sky that went on forever. Everywhere you looked, it was just blue meeting blue. It was beautiful. A quiet that settled into my bones. I knew right then I was going to love this life. At least for the time I was in it, I was going to love it. The rhythm of the steel. Life on a battleship is governed by the loudspeaker. It starts at 600 with a sharp, piercing whistle. Reveille, reveille, all hands, heave out and trice up. You have a choice in those early minutes. You can scramble out of your rack to hit the mess deck for breakfast, or you can steal another hour of sleep before 0700 muster. Muster is the heartbeat of the Navy. Every division stands together, names are called, and a day is laid out. It's where the military becomes a job. You get your assignment, you hear the lieutenant's words, and you begin to grind. In the Navy, you don't just have a job. You have a rank, a ladder you're constantly climbing. I came in as a seaman recruit, a SR, the bottom rung. If I'd have took ROTC in school, I'd have came up 2 ranks higher. But that's neither here nor there. From there, the path was clear. 9 months to seaman apprentice, another 9 months to seaman, and then the big jump to petty officer 3rd class, PO3. That's when you get your chevron. That's when you stop being the one taking orders and start being the one giving them, a supervisor, so to speak. No, definitely a supervisor. My chief once told us in our petty officers, 3rd class, if I catch you working, I'm going to bust you down to an E3. Because if you want to work, I can help make that happen. So if I see you working, I'll be happy to bust you back down. You're supposed to be giving orders, not doing the work. And I couldn't believe that. That was crazy. Yeah. So from there, 2nd class, 1st class, and then the gods of the ship, the chiefs, senior chiefs, and the master chief is the highest ranking officer. The chief is as high as you can go without being an officer. And the chiefs are the ones that get the most respect because they are the ones that everybody knows they actually put in the work. They started from a point and they moved and elevated their position. Officers, it starts off as an ensign and it go all the way up to the captain or, admiral or whatever. But that just is determined by a lot of things. How you did in school, what your graduation level was, And it can also be determined by the time you spent in the military, along with your schooling. But the master chief, even the captain of the ship was bumping head to head with them because they had the experience to back up their position. So above them, the officers, like I said, the ensigns, lieutenants, all the way up to the captain. The captain is the law. He's the highest soul on that 887-foot city, unless an admiral decides to pay a visit. My role was 6th Division. There were 9. We were the eyes and the hands of the ship, lookouts, helmsmen, and the deckhands. We lived in a cycle of watch, 1 day on, 3 days off. On your duty day, you belonged to the Wisconsin. You could hit McDonald's on the base, or anything on the base for that matter, but you weren't leaving that pier. The other 3 days, you were free. Some guys had houses in town, but I lived on the ship that first year. There was no need for a house when I had a bunk and a whole ocean at my doorstep. The Chicago Shield. In Chicago, you watch your back. In the Gulf, you watch your horizon. The game is the same, only the map changes. We arrived in Norfolk, Virginia, and I could say with total pride, that city made a man out of me. It's where I truly grew up. But the biggest lesson I learned in Norfolk didn't come from a manual. It came from the streets I left behind. In the military, everyone is from somewhere else. You're a melting pot of accents and attitudes, all wearing the same stenciled dungarees with your last name over your left pocket. I had a little clout because I'd been with the ship since Pensacola. I was a plank owner. In spirit, there before we even hit Virginia. Plank owner just means you owned a little bit of the ship, the teak wood. And because of my time in the work-study program, I didn't start at the very bottom. I had a little head start on my pay grade. But the real currency was your hometown. People would see me and ask, "Yo, where you from?" They would ask everybody this. "Chicago," I'd say. The reaction was always the same. They do a double take. "Yeah, right, man. For real, where you from?" "Chicago, man, South Side." Why? That's when I realized that Chicago gets respect globally. People already knew that my city was tough. They knew it was no joke. When you tell someone you're from the 312 or the Chi, it carries a certain air of respect, a warranted respect, granted. It was a strange feeling, realizing that the world knew my home was a proving ground before I even stepped foot on it or out of it. It gave me a shield I didn't even know I was carrying. Chicago was doing its thing, and I was the proof. It also made me the test. You from Chicago? Okay, this is my chance to test, to see if Chicago is what they say Chicago is. And I had no problem showing you that it is whatever you think they say it is. The daily grind. A day on the Wisconsin felt like a regular job, just with more gray paint. We'd muster at 0700, work until 15:30, that's 3:30, grab lunch on the mess deck and kick it. We'd talk, we'd hustle, we'd plan. After 3:30, 15:30, if you weren't on watch, you were off. You could head into Norfolk, hit the town, or just hang on the ship and watch the sun go down over the pier, play cards, watch TV, have your girlfriend or one of your friends or as many friends as you want come visit you on the ship. I was 19 years old, a sailor on the most powerful battleship in the world, carrying a reputation of the South Side on my shoulders. I was miles away from the love castle and the heart-shaped cookies. Finding my footing in the world of steel, I was comfortable. I was respected. I was home. But the first thing I did once I got settled in Norfolk, that's where the next chapter of a player really begins. It was a world of sandpaper, needle guns, and constant rhythmic shing-shing of holy stones against teak wood. It was there amidst the dust and the heat that I met Kenneth McDowell. He was from South Carolina, and despite the different zip codes and the way we talked, we were cut from the exact same cloth. We were both young, both far from home, and both trying to maintain our identity and a system designed to erase it, even though he was closer to home than I was. We became inseparable, the two brothers in arms navigating the world of salt spray, gray paint, and the heavy realization that we were now part of the global chess game, from Montego Bay to the ghost of the Missouri. Life on a ship was a paradox, months of grinding, routine broken up by flashes of absolute paradise. We hit Montego Bay, Jamaica, and for a week, the Navy felt like a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Me and McDowell, because that's what we call each other by our last names. Me and McDowell hit the shore like we owned it. We found two honeys on the beach. They were bad. We hit the clubs, felt the bass of the reggae thumping in our chest, and for 7 days in Montego Bay, I forgot about the steel walls of the 16-inch guns and the Wisconsin. But even in paradise of Jamaica, the shadows followed us. We all remember what happened to our sister ship, the Missouri. There was a whole conspiracy swirling around, though the fleet, about the turret explosion. Rumors about a sailor, a love triangle, and a sabotage that cost lives. Every time we stepped into our own turrets or heard a heavy door slam, that ghost was there. It reminded us that we were living on a powder keg. We moved from the turquoise, shark-infested waters of Montego Bay to the blistering dry heat of the Persian Gulf as Desert Shield began to settle in. When we started out to go on a 9-month world tour. And then, what do you know? There was a war. The horizon of fire. I joined the Navy under the simple premise. The world was quiet. I figured I'll do my time, collect my benefits, and get back to my life before any real smoke started. I remember telling myself, there ain't no wars going on, so let me get this over with now so I don't have to join things if it ever gets ugly. No draft. And plus, I can get some money to go to college if I choose to do that. I mean, nobody's going to be doing anything different in 3 years when I get back. Same people going to be doing the same things. Let me go discover something, get some experiences under my belt. The universe must have been laughing. Shortly after I arrived in Norfolk, the world caught fire. What started as whispers in the mess deck turned into reality called Desert Storm. Before I could even get used to the clubs in Virginia, with McDowell and the crew, we were getting the call that Wisconsin was headed to the Persian Gulf. Before that, yeah, we kicked it. We went to a few of the clubs, the Ponderosa in Norfolk, the mall. I forgot what that mall was called. But yeah, we met some people and had some good times. But not enough to get comfortable. Walking on the walls. The transit across the Atlantic was a lesson in the raw power of the ocean. Most people think of a ship as a steady floor, but when you're crossing a deep blue in a battleship, the world becomes vertical. We hit swell so massive that the ship would rock until the bulkheads became the floor. We literally walk on the walls, jumping from the side of the hallway back to the deck, playing a game of grabby that only sailors understood. I felt the seasickness creeping in, the heavy swaying nausea that lives in the back of your throat, but I never folded. I never threw up. I had that Southside pride. I wasn't going to let a wave do what the streets couldn't do. You get your sea legs quick when you have to. Eventually, the rocking just becomes the rhythm of your life. I want to put this in the book, too. I just got a text while I'm reading showing that my wife, Hannah, was texting me that she's packing up, getting ready to come back home from visiting with her friend, Lindy. So, yeah, can't wait till she gets back home. So back to it. The eye of the needle, the Suez and the pyramids. Passing through the Straits of Gibraltar into the Suez Canal was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. There were 887 feet of steel threading a needle. The canal was so narrow it felt like the Wisconsin was barely squeezing through. I remember standing on the deck, looking out at the desert on one side, and I felt like I could take a running start, jump off the teak wood, and land right in Egypt. It was that close. I stood there, a kid from Chicago, who used to look at pictures of the pyramids in school books, and now I was seeing them with my own eyes through the heat haze of the desert. It was beautiful, weird, and terrifying all at once. To see that ancient history while standing on a machine built for modern war, it puts a weight on you. You realize you're part of a story that's been going on for thousands of years. The calm before the storm. Once we arrived, we just sat outside the Persian Gulf waiting. That's the part they don't tell you about, the waiting. We'd be out there at night, the sky so clear, stars looked like they were close enough to touch. I lean against the lifeline, looking up at the vast canopy of light, and the same thought would loop in my head. What if this goes down? What if it actually happens? But as the days bled into weeks, the fear turned into a different kind of focus. Desert Shield shifted into Operation Desert Storm, and suddenly the player in me saw the flip side of the danger. We started getting regular pay, hostile fire pay, endangerment pay, and combat pay. The checks were stacking up. I was making money, more money than I'd ever seen. And I was sending it home, buying those mink blankets, cam quilts, Persian rugs, trying to build a future while sitting in a minefield. We hit Dubai and Bahrain, taking in the sights of the Middle East before the mission turned hot. The air was thick with the scent of oil and salt, and the horizon was beginning to glow with a different kind of light. The wait was almost over, but we didn't know that yet. The master of the helm. By the time we arrived in the Middle East, I wasn't just a sailor, I was a provider. The Navy was stacking my checks, hostile fire pay, combat, all the pays I just told you about. I was flush with more cash than I'd ever seen. I was playing the player of the Persian Gulf, moving through the markets with the mission. Every month, 200 went straight back to Chicago to my girl Donita. But the money was just the beginning. And that's 200 from every check, 200 from the regular pay, 200 from the hostile fire, 200 from the endangered. So maybe $1,000 was going back home. I wanted her to feel the weight of where I was. I sent back gifts that felt like they belonged in a storybook. Thick, heavy mink blankets that could shut out of the Chicago winter, handmade Persian rugs with patterns so intricate they looked like maps of another world, and exotic perfumes from Bahrain that carried the scent of the desert. I was pouring my GI Bill savings into a future I could barely see, trying to keep my heart anchored to home while the boots were planted on the ship. It was during one of these shore leaves that I bought that Sony Handycam. It was a high-end camcorder, the kind of tech that promised to capture every laugh with McDowell and every blood orange sunset over the dunes. I filmed everything, documenting my life on the edge of history. It wasn't until months later that I got that reality check. I bought a PAL system camera in an NTSC Rural. I had $1,000 worth of memories locked in a format that wouldn't play on a single U.S. television. It was a ghost in the machine, $1,000 lesson in technical detail that I absolutely hated. It was a reminder that no matter how much you think you've got the game figured out, there's always a detail lurking in the fine print. So the only way I could look at the things that I've recorded was to look at them through the camera. So while the player was busy in the markets, the sailor was being forged on a bridge. We were supposed to be relieved by our sister ship, the Missouri, after 6 months, but the world had other plans. President Bush was holding the line, and the tension in the Gulf was stretching thin, like a wire about to snap. As Desert Shield began its violent transformation into Operation Desert Storm, the heat didn't just rise in the desert, it rose in the chain of command. I found myself promoted to a position of ultimate, terrifying authority, the helm. She's not just a ship, she's 45,000 tons of diplomatic leverage. Driving a 45,000-ton battleship is a masterclass in patience and negotiation. You don't turn a Wisconsin. You suggest a direction and wait for her to decide if she wants to comply. It's a machine with the momentum of a drifting planet. But before you even get to touch the wheel, you had to survive the report. You had to snap a salute to an officer of the watch and recite the bearings, the navigational heading, and the tactical info in one perfect rhythmic swoop. If you stumbled over a single syllable, if your voice wavered for even a second, the officer would look at you like you were dirt on his boot. He'd make you walk away, stand in a corner like a child, and learn it until you could come back and nail it. It was nerve-wracking, a psychological gauntlet designed to see if you'd crack before you even grip the wheel. The perfect line. Then there was the wheel itself. The danger of the helm is the oversteer. If you turn the wheel and wait too long to meet the swing, the ship's massive weight will carry it right past the mark. If you aren't careful, you'll end up in a 180-degree turn that could cause a collision in a tight formation, or at the very least end your career in disgrace. Most guys will wobble. 10 lines off the mark was the standard for the nervous ones. When you got pretty good, they could keep it within 5. But I didn't come to the Wisconsin to be pretty good. I brought that same technical architecture I used to write rap verses and size up designer tuxedos. I treated that needle like a rhyme scheme. It had to be exact. I reached a status where the wobble disappeared. When I turned that wheel to bring us onto a new heading, the needle didn't bounce. It landed directly on the line every single time. In the real world, I was just the deck seaman at the bottom of the ladder. The helm was the one place where I was absolute master. I was the one steering the most powerful weapon in the United States arsenal through mine-infested waters. I was 20 years old, miles from home. When my hands were on that wheel, I was the only person in the world who mattered. And this is not in the book, but I want to make sure I give a shout out to Petty Officer 3rd Class, James. He's the one who taught me how to do that. So I want to give you a shout out real quick before I move on. Appreciate you. So shout out to you, James. The first strike. When the 16-inch guns fire, the world doesn't just hear it, the world feels it. The night the war started, the air was different. It was 3 a.m., and I was at the helm. The Persian Gulf was pitch black, and we were sitting in mine-infested waters. We knew the mines were out there, floating silent killers that could tear the Wisconsin apart, tear it open like a tin can. The tension on the bridge was so thick you could taste it. The liberation of Kuwait has begun, said George Bush, January 16, 1991. The call came through. The Wisconsin was designated to lead the first Tomahawk missile strike of the war. I felt the vibration of the ship under my boots, the heavy thrum of the engines as we held our position. I was the one holding the needle. I was the one keeping the 887 feet of steel exactly where it needed to be so the missiles could find and fire on their mark. I looked out into the darkness, knowing that 1,500 lives were dependent on my steady hand, as well as the 500 Marines we carried aboard. I thought about the South Side, about the streets, and the kid who used to walk through the park to school. I wasn't just him anymore. I was a sailor in the United States Navy, steering the most powerful weapon in the world into the heart of a storm that would change the world forever. I held the line, I didn't blink, and then the sky exploded. The facts. In the neighborhood, facts were things you could prove on the pavement. Who won the fight? Who had the fastest car? Who was telling the truth? But on the deck of the USS Wisconsin, the facts were measured in tons of steel, thousands of yards of range, and the terrifying math of the modern warfare. When you're 20 years old and steering an Iowa-class battleship through a minefield, you don't just learn the ship's specs. You feel them in your teeth every time the deck vibrates. People see the photos now and think it was just a big boat with big guns. They don't know the weight of being on the big whiskey when the world went dark and the mission went high. The coordinator of chaos. The first fact you have to understand is that on January 17, 1991, we weren't just a participant in the war. We were the conductor. The USS Wisconsin was designated as the Tomahawk Strike Coordinator for the entire Persian Gulf. When I was at the helm at 0300, holding that needle dead on the line, I wasn't just driving a ship. I was steering the brain of the initial attack. Every Tomahawk missile launched from every ship in the Gulf that night was synced to the heartbeat of our bridge. When those first missiles tore off our deck, lighting up the midnight sky with a roar that felt like the sun was being born, It wasn't just a launch. It was the official opening note of Operation Desert Storm. We didn't just join a war. We signaled the start of it. Whispering death. Then there were the guns, the legendary 16-inchers. Each shell weighed about 2,700 pounds. To give you some perspective, that's like firing a Volkswagen Beetle 20 miles through the air. The Iraqis called our shells the Whispering Death. It sounded like a movie title, but the physics behind it were cold and calculated. Those shells traveled faster than the speed of sound. By the time the enemy heard the low whistling moan of the air being torn apart above them, the explosion had already happened. Over the course of the conflict, Big Whiskey spat out 319 rounds of that steel rain. We weren't just fighting, we were rearranging the geography of the coast. The drone and the surrender. One of the wildest facts of the time on the ship involved a small buzzing machine called the Pioneer UAV. We were the first to use these drones to spot our big guns. During a shore bombardment of Fialaka Island, the drone was circling overhead to see where our shells were landing. Our strategy to go after this army is very, very simple. First, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to kill it. General Colin Powell. The Iraqi soldiers on the ground had been hammered by the 16-inchers before, and they knew the sound of the drone meant the Beetles were about to start falling from the sky again. In a moment that made naval history, they didn't wait for the next blast. They looked up at the unmanned camera and surrendered to the drone. It was the first time in history of warfare that a human force surrendered to a machine. I remember the word spreading through the ship. We didn't even have to fire. The mere threat of the Wisconsin's reach was enough to break their will. The surrender of Iraqi troops to a Pioneer RPV drone launched from the USS Wisconsin was the first time in history that soldiers surrendered to a robot. Official Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum record. The invisible minefield. But the most sobering fact was the one beneath our feet. We were operating in the northern Persian Gulf, an area the Iraqis had turned into a graveyard of hidden sea mines. These weren't the cartoonish things you see in movies. They were sophisticated, silent killers waiting for a hull like ours. Our sister ship, the USS Missouri, was out there with us. But our other siblings weren't so lucky. The USS Princeton and the USS Tripoli both hit mines during the war, suffering massive damage. Every time I stood at the helm, saluted the sergeant of the watch, and took control of the wheel, I knew I was steering a billion-dollar legend through a field of explosiveness. One slip of my hand, 1 degree off the heading, and all those mink blankets, Persian rugs, and letters would end up at the bottom of the Gulf. The teak and the truth. Finally, there's the fact of the deck itself. As I've said, we're the only ship left with the teak wood deck amidst the high-tech Tomahawks, the Phalanx Sea-Whiz R2-D2 guns, and the drone technology. We were still down on our knees with holy stones, scrubbing wood like sailors from the 1800s. It was a strange bridge between the past and the future. We were the most powerful battleship class in the history of the world, a 1940s design upgraded with the 1990s lethality. We were old school grit meeting new age fire. And that was the ultimate fact of the Wisconsin. She was a survivor. And as I stood there at the helm, landing that needle directly on the line while the Tomahawk screamed into the night, I realized I was becoming one too. Black sun. By the time the ground war hit its stride, the Persian Gulf didn't feel like a place on Earth anymore. It felt like a different planet. One where the sky had been stolen. The sun didn't rise or set in the Gulf. It just disappeared. Saddam's retreating forces had torched the oil wells in Kuwait, and the smoke they produced wasn't smoke the way we knew it. This wasn't chimney smoke or exhaust smoke. This was a living, thick, black, rolling organism that swallowed the horizon whole. No amount of Southside toughness prepares you for a sky that looks like it's dying. The midnight noon, standing on the deck the Wisconsin at midday was like standing in the middle of a solar eclipse that never ended. 12 noon looked like 12 midnight. The sun didn't shine. It bled through the smoke in a sickly orange smear like a flashlight behind a dirty rag. The light didn't warm your skin. It didn't brighten anything. It just hung there, weak and embarrassed, like it knew it wasn't in charge anymore. The ship's automatic lights would flicker on in the middle of the day because the sensors thought night had fallen. You'd look out towards the horizon and see nothing. A line where the sky met the water. No, it wasn't there. No distance, no depth. Just a wall of black, an 887-foot battleship, a floating city of steel, felt like it was drifting through a void. It was the kind of darkness that didn't just surround you, it pressed on you. It felt like you were in the world alone, going nowhere, being saved by no one, trying to avoid little balls in the water that can kill you and make your whole ship explode. Smell of the grave. But as haunting as the looks were, the smell was stayed in our clothes. It wasn't the smell of a campfire or a backyard grill. It was the heavy, clawing scent and unrefined crude oil and sulfur. It smelled like a mechanic's shop that had been set on fire. It was a greasy, thick aroma that felt heavy in your lungs, like you were breathing in liquid metal. It had a sweetness to it that was nauseating, the smell of the earth's blood being spilled by millions of gallons. After a few hours on deck, you could taste it on your tongue. It was a metallic, bitter film that no amount of ship's coffee could wash away. Sustained connection. In the middle of that soot-choked nightmare, mail call was still the only thing that made us feel human. I remember standing out on the deck when a letter from Danita finally made it into my hands. The envelope had started its journey in a Chicago crisp and white smelling of home. But the second I touched it, the facts of the Gulf took over. My fingers were permanently stained with carbon and grease, no matter how hard I scrubbed. As I tore the envelope open, I watched in real time as my black thumbprint smeared across her careful writing. The white paper turned gray, then oily black. Wherever I touched it, it felt like a metaphor I wasn't ready to face. The war wasn't just happening around me. It was seeping into my letters, staining my memories, and blurring the lines between the kid who left and the sailor who was standing in the dark. I wanted to keep her world clean, but the black sun made sure everything we touched belonged to the furnace. So me thinking that while I'm on watch, I can sneak and read these letters only turned into the reality that I couldn't read the letters because I was destroying them as I was trying to read them. The rain of soot. And then came the rain. Not water, not mist, not anything natural. When the Gulf humidity mixed with that smoke, it created a kind of precipitation that felt like the sky was crying oil. We called it black rain, but that doesn't really capture it. It didn't fall like raindrops. It drifted, slow, lazy flakes of greasy soot that floated down like cursed snow. We'd be out there stoning the teak deck, scrubbing it with pumice stones to keep it bright and clean, and the soot would start falling. You'd look down and see the black specks landing on the white wood, on your dungarees, on your arms. Wipe your forehead. Your hand came back streaked with carbon. Look at your shipmates. Everyone looked like they'd been working in a coal mine. We were fighting a war against an enemy we couldn't see. But we were also fighting a war against the environment itself, the air, the sky, the water. Everything felt contaminated by the same darkness. Even when we went to take a shower, that smell was there because we were using the same contaminated water that was being recycled inside of the ship. The world on fire. Sometimes I stand at the helm, hands on the wheel, steering Big Whiskey through the man-made night, and I think about how different the ocean had looked on the way from Norfolk. Back then, the sea was peaceful, a mirror for the sky. Now it was dark, churning children, reflecting a world that had set its own horizons on fire. The Gulf didn't feel like a place where life happened. It felt like a place where life ended. And yet, in the middle of all that darkness, we still had a job to do. We still had watch to stand. We still had routines to follow. We still had each other. We all understood. We were just witnessing a war, but that wasn't it. We were also breathing it. The sky was the color of the bad bruise, and the air tasted like pennies and grease. We weren't just fighting in a desert. We were fighting in a furnace with the door shut. Heading home. As president, I can say I report to the nation. Aggression is defeated. The war is over, President Bush. So now we're heading back to Norfolk. I left Chicago, joined the Navy, went to war, went through war, and now I'm heading back to Norfolk. A man, a full-grown adult male who has been through the worst of what life has to offer. Worse than growing up in Chicago, gang culture, pimp culture, worse than anything anybody could ever imagine. I'm a different man. The way I look at life is different. The way I look at people is different. I'm a changed man. I'm hard, I'm cold, unafraid, not 100% unafraid, but I'm becoming really fearless. I'm losing touch of some of my humanity because of what I had to make myself go through, what I had to make myself think, how I had to make myself feel to get through 9 months of thinking that death is right around the corner, of breathing in and exhaling death. Now I'm headed back home, a different man than I left. Will anyone notice me? Will anyone recognize me? Will anyone understand that I'm different now? I know no one will understand what happened because you can only understand if you were there. Regardless, I'm headed back to Norfolk. Join me in the life of a jackal, Book 2, where we get to talk about getting back to Norfolk, how I was a changed man, my life evolved from that point, moving forward into adulthood, and how I really thought about playing the game of life differently, and how I learned to fear no man, and why I got it tattooed on my arm. Join me in the life of a jackal, Book 2, a sailor, a husband, a kid from the south side of Chicago, coming of age.
In a world that evolves in all ways, your foundation is eternal love always. So me, Nation Bell, if you wanna see me next time I'm on the frequency, yeah.